Dr. Jonathan Stea is our guest. You can find him at Jonathan Stea on Twitter. Jonathan Stea has a website as well. His new book is called, and you should get it September the 3rd, depending on when you hear this. It's kind of the day I think it's coming out. September the 3rd, it's called Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. We're talking about that podunk wellness industry right now. I always look for root cause. Like I should have been a doctor or a lawyer. I really should have. But I'm not smart enough for either. So here I am talking to you, trying to be one. But I always look for root cause, right? And so as we're sitting here talking about people who are submitting themselves to eating, poop pills to cure autism, dirt pills, drinking their own urine, that comes from desperation. It comes from somewhere, right? It comes from not having information, being brought up in a certain environment, believing that these things are true, or extreme resentment for real evidence-based science, right? Like that's what we see here. But in terms of the pre-context for that wellness industry, do you think that there's a certain segment of people who are like, let's see if we can make people pay for poop pills and see how much money we can make? Or are there factions who truly believe that drinking your own urine, eating dirt and poop pills works?
It's both in a sense. And I in my experience, I like to think that the vast majority of these grifters, so to speak, are actually caring people that just want to make a living, and they do want to help people. And I think that they're grossly misinformed. And I think they're married to their pseudoscientific beliefs and their ideology. And I think that's what drives a lot of it. Of course, I think there's also malicious grifters out there who just do want to exploit people. But I think it's almost more dangerous when you get people that actually buy into their own pseudo-profound bullshit, so to speak. And we see that in the fringe industries as well, with even, and it's not just wellness grifters, it's fringe experts. You can have MDs and PhDs who are also working at the margins or the fringe, so to speak, who are peddling ideas that completely contradict the body of scientific evidence that we have and contradict the vast majority of experts that we have. And I think the vast majority of those folks actually believe it. And I think that in some ways that makes it more dangerous because it makes them more passionate.
Passionate because, maybe it's something they've experienced through whatever placebo effect that they might have had. Passionate because it aligns deeply with their core belief system. What do you fight more, right? That's the question I would have for you. And then I want to get to a profile of someone that, we've talked about the grifters, but the profile of someone who's susceptible to buying a dirt pill or eating ivermectin on a cracker. But when you look at, let's be serious. It's paste, right? You can get it at the horse and tackle farm down the street. And they were out for 2 years and they had to put signs up going, hey, this is for horses. Anyway, doesn't matter. But when you think about, not just the grift itself as you profile these individuals, but you also think about, trying to correct the record. What is it that, in the minds of these people who are susceptible to these things, what is it that they have in common, in terms of core beliefs, in terms of cognitive issues? It's kind of a nice way to say it. When you look at it from a psychological perspective, you profile some of the people that have been taken by this industry, that have had their wallets and their minds co-opted by the industry, where it's it's us versus them. Big pharma's not out for your interest. Pills don't work. Just eat a steak and you'll get rid of a herniated disc in your back, or just, anything that is not clearly not evidence-based. When you look at that, what are the commonalities and what are the things that you fight most in therapy with people who you're trying to help, unwrap why they don't seem to trust evidence-based anything or experts now? Because to me, that's the biggest problem that we have, right? It's not just the disinformation. It's that disinformation that goes to a specific kind of person. And I want to know what that person is and how do you unwrap all that damage, or do you?
It's hard. And so, I'm not doing that in therapy per se. I mean, that's a different goal. And so my other hat is this science communication. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach people to kind of inoculate them or help protect them against this kind of misinformation. in terms of the profile that you mentioned, like who falls for misinformation and who falls for these kinds of pseudoscientific treatment, when you look to the psychology literature on it, it paints a very, as you might expect, a complicated picture. So it's not just any one particular variable, rather it's the interaction of these variables, and there's so many kind of at play. And to help me understand it, I think of it as kinds of, there's individual level variables, so things within us, and then there's kind of social forces that kind of make it worse. And so the things within us, there's certain personality traits. So one is called openness to experience. So people that score high on this kind of personality trait or factor will be people that tend to be a bit more creative, out of the box thinkers, kind of sensation seeking in a sense. And again, it's people that score high on this won't necessarily fall for misinformation. It just places them more likely to do that in combination with other factors. So there's another personality variable called conspiracy mentality. So people who score high on this factor tend to endorse conspiracies, and that's just one variable. There's another one called lack of intellectual humility, or its kind of converse is narcissism. That's another factor that comes in play. You mentioned one called mistrust. That's a huge one. People tend to mistrust institutions or people more than others. People that score higher on mistrust will also tend to fall for misinformation. And
you really see that in the bifurcation with experts versus non-experts, right? Like that's where I really see it, is in don't trust the experts. JD Vance, David Parker, who I know and actually like. We don't need your education. We don't need your expertise. We know exactly what we're doing. We're kind of coming back.
And there's a difference between two, like these all fall on a spectrum. Like there's the odd person. We're all susceptible to misinformation. Like my friends or my family, someone may turn to energy healing because they think it'll help them, and they might believe it's true. But that person could be different than the person who becomes very extreme and married to their pseudoscientific beliefs. They've incorporated that into their identity. That's your freedom fighters, or the ones who are harassing me on social media every day because they've really become their beliefs in a way that's sort of detrimental. And so those are people that score really, really high. And, the people that I'm trying to reach in my book aren't those people. And the audience of the science communicator isn't what I call the ideologically possessed. It's sort of it's the general public who are just bombarded with mixed messaging all the time. And it's naturally hard to know what information to believe. And we all have these biases in our brains. We have these shortcuts. We think in shortcuts. And so the wellness industry itself capitalizes on these biases. So I'm just trying to help people, the everyday Joe, so to speak, kind of navigate that terrain. Then, of course, you have these people who unfortunately have become very, very far. They've almost become, they're extreme in their beliefs, and it's kind of overwhelmed them. Those people can come back from this stuff too, but that's a very tall order. And I think that takes a lot of work. And that's not what we're trying to do with the science communication level, is reach those folks. I think that's a different kind of beast, so to speak.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, you can probably suss this out in some of your personal relationships, maybe not so many in your professional relationships. Are those people who are, cognitively, purposefully divorced from reality, right? The reality of evidence-based treatment. But there's also a reality that hey, listen, I'm not too far off on when it comes to some alternative treatments in that Venn diagram where they're starting to touch evidence-based treatments, right? And it seems to me that that's another minefield for someone like you who really is an evidence-based guy. It's like, hey, listen, psilocybin is starting to, Johns Hopkins, there's a great study out of Johns Hopkins about psilocybin, hero doses when it comes to relief for people that have symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, depression, something that I dabble in, something that I have done, and I believe I have benefited from. Cannabis, I stopped drinking, haven't drank for really 7 years. That was cannabis that helped me sleep. I needed to get into a sleep cycle. and there are questions in my head, and you and I connect on evidence-based stuff. Like, we connect on responsibility, accountability, doing the right thing for community when it comes to medicine during the pandemic. I believe we both had very, very similar perspectives, which made me feel good because you have all the education and I have none. I'm like, I'm just as smart as he is. But I've experienced some relief. Don't know if it's placebo effect relief. And you're starting to see some of the alternative treatments and alternative, think AA. I was in AA for 2 years, and I know that I've read your book. It's something that you place in that kind of a gray area, as opposed to evidence-based science. And I greatly benefited from it. And I, again, don't know if that's placebo effect, but I guess the question I'm getting at to you, because, I don't have the education you have. I know what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and I believe in it, and I support it, because evidence-based science, it doesn't care if you think it's true or not. It's still fucking true. And I truly do believe that. However, where I find that interesting is it almost gives the alternative wellness grifter crowd like a toe into evidence-based science, right? Where they're like, and then you add on what we clearly know, if you've seen any of the Sackler documentaries, you know anything about the opioid crisis, the distrust in big pharma.